while everyone is looking at Venezuela, the real story, the one with potentially much, much bigger consequences for your day-to-day life, it's pivoting north.
That's right. I mean, the dust hasn't even settled in Caracas. We don't know the full legal ramifications yet. But President Trump is already turning his gaze toward Mexico.
And he's using some incredibly specific, incredibly loaded language. I want to read something he said just recently about the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum. It's been everywhere, but I think we need to really parse it. He said, quote, "She's a good woman, but she's not running Mexico. The cartels are running Mexico."
That single sentence is the pivot point. It tells us everything about where this administration's head is at. It frames the narrative completely.
So that is our mission for this deep dive. We're looking at the sources to answer one massive question. Trump has proven he is willing to use direct force in the region. We just saw it.
Yeah.
Will he use that same playbook, strikes, troops, intervention against Mexican cartels?
And maybe more importantly, would that strategy actually work?
Right.
Or is the situation in Mexico just fundamentally different from Venezuela?
Right. Is this a copy-paste situation, or are we looking at a totally different beast?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Yeah.
And to get the answer, we have to peel back 3 specific layers. First, we need to talk about why the cartels aren't who we think they are, what we can call the kingpin fallacy. Second, we have to look at something much darker, this deep political collusion that makes the whole idea of taking out the bad guys almost impossible.
And finally, we have to look at where this leaves President Sheinbaum. I mean, she is stuck between a very demanding White House and a fractured ruling party.
It's the ultimate tightrope walk.
Okay, let's unpack this. So, segment 1, the mood in Washington. Trump is riding high on this Maduro capture. It feels like a victory lap.
Well, that's putting it mildly. It's seen as a total vindication of his heavy-handed approach. He promised to take out a narco-terrorist regime, and, well, he did it. So now he's looking at the southern border and applying that same war on drugs rhetoric.
The sources mention some stats he's throwing around to justify this next move.
Right. He's claiming that his administration has knocked out 97% of the drugs coming in by water.
97%? I mean, that seems incredibly high.
It's a very specific, very confident number. So in his view, the logic follows, right?
Yeah.
If you seal the ocean, the next step is to hit the cartels on land. He's talking about U.S. troops entering Mexico to take out the cartels.
And he's citing the Monroe Doctrine to do it?
Citing the Monroe Doctrine.
No.
Yeah.
Whoa, hold on. High school history is flashing back. The Monroe Doctrine. That's the 19th century policy basically telling Europe to stay out of the Western Hemisphere, right?
Correct. Originally, it was about keeping colonial powers, Spain or Britain, out. America for the Americans.
Mm-hmm.
But in this context, the White House is dusting it off to say something very different.
What are they saying with it now?
They're using it to say, this is our backyard. And if the neighbors can't keep their house in order, we have the right to go in and clean it up. It's an assertion of preeminence.
So it's less about protecting from outsiders and more about the U.S. being the one in charge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The argument is that fentanyl and cocaine are killing tens of thousands of Americans. So this is a defense of the homeland.
Mm-hmm.
It creates this moral and legal framework for intervention.
Which brings us to the comparison. Trump looks at Venezuela, sees a drug state, takes action. He looks at Mexico, sees a drug state, and wants to take action. But are they the same thing?
Not even close. And this is where the danger lies. Mexico is the main producer of U.S.-bound fentanyl and the main corridor for cocaine.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the actual global drug trade, Mexico is a much, much bigger player than Venezuela ever was.
The scale is just bigger.
Much bigger.
Yeah.
And the integration with the U.S. is completely different. But there's also this leadership dynamic that's weird. Maduro was an explicit enemy. He was a narco-terrorist. But Sheinbaum, Trump calls her a good woman.
A good woman who he believes is very frightened.
And that's the crucial distinction. Sheinbaum has firmly rejected any offer of U.S. troops. She's emphasizing sovereignty. She wants to work with Trump, not take orders from him.
But Trump doesn't see that as national pride. He sees it as fear.
Exactly. He thinks she's scared the cartels, that she's paralyzed. And look, the cartels are terrifying. But assuming she's just afraid, completely misses the structural reality of what she's dealing with.
Well, let's talk about that reality, because I think a lot of us, and maybe the administration too, have this kind of movie version of how this works. Narcos, you send in drones, special forces, you take out the boss, and the whole thing crumbles. Why can't we just do that?
Right.
Why not just take out the leaders like we did with Maduro or El Chapo?
This is where it gets really interesting. If you're picturing Narcos, Mexico, on Netflix, guys in silk shirts by a pool calling all the shots.
Yeah.
You are working with Seriously outdated data.
Okay, so update me. What does the map actually look like today?
So in the 1990s, you had roughly 6 big dominant cartels. They were top-down hierarchical. You could map them out. You knew the CEO, you knew the VPs.
Sure.
Today, experts are tracking around 400 different groups operating in Mexico.
400 separate criminal organizations?
Wow. Roughly, yes. The fragmentation is extreme. I mean, take the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. It's arguably the most powerful brand right now. But it's not a monolith. It's actually made up of about 90 smaller organizations, all allied together.
So it's less like a pyramid and more like a franchise system?
That's a great way to put it, or a hydra.
Yeah.
One of the sources used this brilliant analogy that really stuck with me. They said, if you took out the CEO of Coca-Cola tomorrow, you wouldn't stop Coca-Cola sales.
That actually makes a ton of sense. The demand is there, the bottling plants, the trucks. The CEO is almost just a figurehead.
Precisely. The logistics network is independent of the leadership. And we have historical evidence that this whole kingpin strategy, which was the U.S. and Mexican strategy from about 2007 to 2017, it actually backfired.
Because they tried this before. They arrested a lot of big names.
They did. But when they arrested the leaders, the big groups didn't just disappear, they splintered. They broke into smaller, more violent cells that then fought each other for turf.
So by cutting off the head, we just created a bunch of smaller, angrier heads.
And those smaller heads had to diversify their income. This is the other huge shift. These groups aren't just drug traffickers anymore. They act like feudal lords. They tax avocado growers. They extort local tortilla shops. They steal oil from pipelines. They smuggle migrants.
It's a full-service criminal economy.
It is. A study from 2023 estimated that cartels employ between 160,000 and 185,000 people.
Wait, can we just pause on that number? 185,000 people?
Yes.
That's massive. That's bigger than most U.S. suburbs. That's a mid-sized city entirely on the criminal payroll.
Exactly. It challenges the very definition of what a cartel is. It's not some terrorist cell you can neutralize with a targeted strike. It is a deeply embedded economic network. You've got accountants, lawyers, drivers, lookouts, chemists.
So you can't just strike that away without collapsing the local economy in some of these places.
Correct.
Okay, so they're everywhere. They employ everyone. That's bad. But here's the thing that always confuses me. The Mexican government has an army. It has police. Why can't they just crush these 400 groups? Is it just incompetence?
And this is the part that is the most disturbing. And it's the part that explains why Scheinbaum's hesitation isn't just fear. It's not cartels versus the government. In many places, the cartels are the government.
You mean corruption? Like bribing a cop to look the other way?
Deeper, much deeper. We're talking about a mosaic of power. You have to remember, for 71 years, Mexico was run by a one-party system. During that time, the government didn't fight crime, it managed it. They shielded their favored criminals and jailed the rivals.
And that didn't stop when democracy came in?
No, the lines just got fuzzier. And we have a smoking gun example from the sources on this that it really blew my mind. We need to talk about Tabasco.
Which is the home state of the former president, AMLO, right?
Correct. And a stronghold for the ruling party, Morena. So let's look at a man named Hernan Bermudez Requena. Until 2024, he was the top state security official in Tabasco. The top cop.
Okay. The guy in charge of keeping people safe.
Military intelligence documents revealed that while he was running state security, he was simultaneously running a local crime group called La Barradora.
Hold on. The head of security was the head of the gang.
Yes, he wasn't just taking bribes, he was the boss. And it gets messier. He wasn't just some rogue actor. He was appointed by Adán Augusto López.
And who is he?
A current senator, a former governor, and a very close friend of former President AMLO. This isn't low-level corruption. This reaches into the highest levels of the ruling party.
So if you're President Scheinbaum and you say, I'm going to clean house, you're not just arresting bad guys. You're arresting your predecessor's friends. You're arresting your own party members.
Exactly. It's political suicide.
That puts that fear comment from Trump in a whole new light. It's not fear of the guys with guns necessarily. It's fear of destroying her own government.
And that brings us to the election violence we saw in 2024. 30 candidates killed, hundreds dropped out. Why? Because the criminals are actively installing their own mayors to secure their territory. They are handpicking the government.
That is it's terrifying. It puts Scheinbaum in an absolutely impossible position. Trump is screaming from the north, fix this or I will, and her own party is rotting from the inside.
She's walking a tightrope over a volcano.
So let's look at her options. She's the president. She has to do something.
She does. But she has a problem that AMLO didn't have. AMLO founded the party. He had iron control. He was the charismatic leader. Sheinbaum is the successor, so the party is factionalized. If she goes after corrupt officials like the guys in Tabasco, she risks tearing her own coalition apart.
And she also has to worry about the violence, right? If she actually did what Trump waged total war, what happens on the streets?
Bloodshed. The Mexican public is exhausted. They've had 20 years of a drug war with hundreds of thousands dead or disappeared. Destroying those protection rackets, as corrupt as they are, often leads to a vacuum. In that vacuum, groups fight for control. Violence spikes. Sheinbaum knows this.
So what is she doing? Because she can't do nothing.
She's performing toughness for the U.S. audience without waging total war at home. It's political theater.
How so?
Well, she sent thousands of troops to the border. She transferred 92 cartel leaders to U.S. prisons. She even arrested a Marina mayor accused of working with La Familia Michoacana.
A sacrificial lamb.
It's a signal. She talks about zero impunity, but notice what she doesn't talk about? The political fractures. She avoids discussing the system that lets the crime exist in the first place. She acts against individuals, not the architecture of collusion.
It sounds like a stalling tactic, trying to keep Trump happy without blowing up Mexico. And here's the scary part, Trump isn't known for his patience. What happens if he ignores no? What if he looks at the map and says, I'm sending in the Marines?
Then we're in completely uncharted waters.
Yeah.
And the risks are. They're massive.
Break them down for me. What happens if boots hit the ground?
First, a nationalist backlash. We mentioned the 19th century invasions earlier. That is deep in the Mexican psyche. If U.S. troops cross that border uninvited, it could turn the Mexican army and the public hostile toward the U.S. You lose your partner entirely.
You go from cooperation to occupation.
Exactly. And then there's the destabilization. We have a cautionary tale from just last summer. Remember when they captured El Mayo Zambada?
Sinaloa cartel leader, yeah. That was a huge story.
Right. They grabbed him, flew him to New Mexico. Great headline, great photo op. But on the ground, it triggered an internal war within the cartel. Thousands died. It was chaos. Now imagine that writ large across the entire country because of a U.S. intervention.
So you take out the leaders and you get a civil war among the gangs.
Which spills over into the streets. And unlike Venezuela, Mexico is our neighbor.
And our #1 trade partner.
This is the economic nuke. Venezuela is an isolated economy. Mexico is integrated into everything we do. Cars, food, technology. A conflict that shuts down the border or creates chaos in Mexico's industrial centers. It disrupts the entire North American economy.
So hitting Mexico hits our own wallet.
Immediately, severely. We're talking about supply chains for Ford and GM. We're talking about the price of avocados and tomatoes doubling overnight.
So let's wrap this up. We started with Trump looking for a fight. He sees a nail, the cartels, and he has a very big hammer, the military.
And he just used that hammer successfully in Venezuela. He thinks he has the winning formula.
But all the source material we're looking at is screaming that Mexico is not a nail.
No, it's a rotting structure. The criminals and the politicians are so often the same people, you can't just hammer it without the whole house falling down.
And Trump's confidence from Venezuela might be his biggest blind spot here.
Success can be dangerous. It makes you think the same solution works everywhere. But if the U.S. treats Mexico like Venezuela, they might find that winning the battle against a few kingpins actually loses the war.
And losing the war means destabilizing your biggest neighbor and trade partner.
Is a victory worth the chaos it creates? That's the question Washington needs to answer, fast.
And that's a question I want you, the listener, to think about. When a neighbor demands security at any cost, at what point does sovereignty just dissolve? And what happens to the neighborhood when it does?
It's a sobering thought.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll be watching the headlines.
Stay curious.
See you next time.